Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for taking your time off and joining us in this very interesting webinar. I have with me our guest speaker, Radhika Gupta. Needs no introduction actually, but let me just go through her, bio a little bit because it allows us to see how interesting a life she has led so far, and she's been in the family of a career diplomat, so she's been traveling all along. So that means that she's introduced to a variety of cultures. So diverse cultures is no stranger to her. Travel is not a stranger to her. And then, of course, she's after her MBA from Wharton. She's joined the McKinsey, premier consultant organization. Again, needs no introduction. From there, she went into investment management with a hedge fund, AQR Capital, one of the storied hedge fund, if I may mention that. And in 2010, of course, I think led by the potential of India, she's come back to her roots, and she started, in fact, she pioneered the hedge fund movement in India with Forefront. I happened to get to know Radhika in that stint, and post that, she got a hedge fund Forefront merged Edelweiss Asset Management, and currently she is shepherding the Edelweiss Asset Management Company as the CEO. She has again very interesting accomplishments. Soon after joining Edelweiss AMC, she acquired the JP Morgan Asset Management Company for Edelweiss, and of course there have been a lot of innovations during her stint, and her most recent one, again, very interesting product that she introduced to investors here. That's the Bharat Bond ETF, the first bond exchange traded fund in India, and of course, the story of its success still continues as we go along, and I'm sure that as we progress, we get to hear more of Radhika. But more interestingly, on the topic today, that's communication in times of crisis. It's typically what we say: in the darkest hour emerges the finest of leaders. We have seen it happen in politics with Winston Churchill during the wartime, during Britain's darkest hour. We have seen his speech, how he came across, cut across, and spoke directly to the citizens of Britain, and helped steer Britain during a very dark and difficult period. We have, famous address by Abraham Lincoln. So all that in politics, but we also have our own set of heroes in investment management, and people who have stewarded the relationships in times of crisis. And interestingly, I think Radhika has set up during this time of crisis, has set up a very unique way in establishing communication with both investors directly, her immediate partners, the distributors, the advisors, as well as her employees. So I won't more about this. It's better to hear from Radhika, and she makes it more interesting anyways. So over to you, Radhika, and here we look forward to your address.
Hi everyone, I think now you can hear me. Sorry for a little bit of the technology challenges. So as you know, I'm Radhika. I'm really excited. Thanks Raj for the introduction to be doing this webinar with you. It's a webinar on communication, and obviously I'm communicating in very interesting times. Usually when I do these webinars, I'm not a stranger to doing this. I'm sitting in my office dressed in a very formal sari trying to do a webinar for you. So this is a new challenge for me. I'm sitting here in informal clothes, working from home, trying to do a webinar for you. So hopefully I'm going to make it interesting in a new format. What I hope to do is, in the 1 hour that we have, probably speak for 25, 30 minutes. And everything that I speak, I'm not a communications expert, but everything I speak will be experience. Hopefully a few stories along the way, because I really believe that that is the best way to teach anything, definitely communication. So that's how we'll do it. And then I'll hand the floor to Raj, because it's a seminar, it's about communication. It should be interactive and communicative. So we'll take lots of Q&A, and I have to make sure I have lots of time. I thought that the topic was called communicating in a crisis. But a lot of times you also hear the word a crisis of communication. And that's why I called the webinar, communication can be a strength, it can be a weakness. You can either be a champion in communicating in a crisis, or you can do it really badly, and hence we've heard the word crisis of communication. Um, Incidentally, in the situation that we're sitting in, a few weeks ago, a friend of mine messaged me. He's retired, and he said, "I really envy you." And I said, "Why do you envy me?" Because you're someone who's living a retired life. You've got loads of money. You don't have to deal with this. And he said, "For once, I wish I was a leader. I wish I was running an asset management business, because the amount of challenges that this poses for communication, perhaps no training or corporate boardroom will teach you." And I said, "Yes, you're absolutely right. We're living that, and I'm personally living that. I keep joking. This is my first stint as wartime CEO. I think there is something called a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO, and I'm truly living my first stint as wartime CEO. But I want to go to sort of the meta point, and if you can see the slides, just follow along with me. If you can't, it really doesn't matter. But I want to just, because we're all sitting locked up at home right now, I want you to do a very simple thought exercise. And that thought exercise, actually, I'll go a slide back, is if I told you the word beach, just imagine your own visual of what a beach would look like. And while I can't hear the different reactions from you, I suspect that you'll hear, you give me very different answers. I've done this exercise in better times. And some people will tell me that when they think of a beach, they think of walking hand in hand with a loved one on a sunset in Goa. Some people will tell me something about just waking up and seeing the waves and doing some water sports. Some people will tell me they envision a sandcastle. And someone now, because I asked them this question, said, "Well, I would dream of my daughter drawing a beach because that's the closest I can imagine during a lockdown." And in an exercise as simple as this, where I gave you a question, imagine a beach, and this is of happy times, you get four very, very different answers. And to me, that is the genesis of why you need to communicate. Because in the most basic thought, there are so many points of view. And as a leader, as an owner of a business, as a relationship professional, you have a certain point of view, but your job is to make sure that the end customer sees things from the same point of view as you do. A group of friends, it's all okay for all of us to imagine four different versions of beaches. But when you're sitting in a crisis and you have to communicate, there can only be one beach out there. And beach means one thing. In war, when there is a direction, it means only one thing. And I think that is why communication is so important, because you at the top have to disseminate a message, sometimes to 10 clients, sometimes to 20 clients. For people like us in the mutual fund business, it's often to lakhs and lakhs of customers. And when I say beach, they all need to be thinking the same thing, especially at this kind of time. I want to ask you another thought experiment, and that is that, a lot of the times when we think of communication, we start to think of it from point of view. Uh, but just imagine as you're going through this webinar, how does, and many of you are in the client facing business, how are your clients currently thinking in a crisis? What is at the top of their mind? If you think of the life of an average client, what is at the top of his mind today or in any crisis? This could be 2008. And let me just give you a few examples. For many people, the foremost worry at the top of their mind is, my business is going to shut down. If you talk to friends in manufacturing, if you talk, we think we have it hard in financial services, at least we can work from home. If you talk to friends who run a manufacturing company, if you talk to friend who runs a 400-room hotel in Rajasthan, ask him what he's feeling right now. Or if you talk to salaried professionals, they're either worried that their business is going to close down, that they're going to have job cuts, something like this. So this is one of the things that's on top of every client's mind right now. The second thing that's on top of their mind is, of course, the fact that their portfolios are bleeding red. Now, we are investment professionals, we are managers of money. We feel bad when clients' portfolios bleed red, but these are people whose money is bleeding red. Sounds very simple, but this is what someone's going through. The third thing people hear in this day and age, and that is very common in a client's life, is bad news flashed around us. Bad news, bad news, bad news. If you're on any WhatsApp group, you probably read 10 messages in 10 groups about how COVID is going to end the world, how none of us are going to survive. You read messages about markets, you read about doom and gloom. Not all of it is necessarily true, by the way. So you're surrounded by bad news. In fact, some of you have probably gone through experiences. I went through this on a friend's WhatsApp group. People just started exiting the group because they were tired of hearing bad news. Annoying. And the fourth thing that any client is probably going through is stress at home. It could be a spouse wondering how is the next year going to go, if there are losses in business, what is the impact on my lifestyle. So these are, I mean, when you think about communication, start with your audience, and that is a customer, and these are the four things that he is going through. So before anything we want to say to a customer, put yourself in this guy's shoes and live this person's life for before you start to utter a single word. And I find that exercise very, very useful. So once you know this, a few basics of communication that I learned, my first crisis was 2008. The first thing I learned about communication is that this is the place where you want to come first. You don't want a customer to call you and say, okay, I've heard this bad news on TV, tell me about it. You want to be the guy that goes to the customer or the client and says, listen, there's probably going to be a problem here. I may not know how to solve it, but there is probably going to be a problem here. People appreciate proactivity, and they get really put off by lack of proactivity. Unfortunately, in the industry that we come from, everybody appears, clients do see people as fair weather friends. So you have a lot of people going in good times and saying, look at how good my performance is, look at how good my numbers are, this is a great opportunity for you to buy. All this stuff happens. However, in a bad time, a lot of those people disappear. I was looking at Twitter yesterday, and in this airline cancellation phase, someone wrote a very angry tweet about how the flight was going to be cancelled and the airline company was just not available. That irritates people. So the first step in communication, in my view, is to be accessible. The second step is, this is a time to be the bearer of bad news. It is hard to communicate, but I promise you, if you're the first one to relay the bad news in a simple and balanced way, people will respect you for it, and people will appreciate you for it. The third point also is that when you relay that, the conversations that you're going to have are not going to be easy conversations. I'll also be honest, whether you're in the distribution business or the investment management business, some of the things that we do in bull markets are done with the best intent, but often turn out to be mistakes in hindsight. I don't think any of us intend to make the mistakes because we intend to do the best for our clients. At least that's what my belief is. Don't use this as an opportunity to deflect blame. The worst thing you can say is, sir, when an angry client is there, so, but I told you, actually it was not my fault. My boss told me this. It's like being a guy who calls a call center and you're really angry and you call a call center and he's like, but sir, my manager will have to take a call. That's just frustrating. If you're doing client conversations at a time like this, know that the conversation will not be pleasant, but just give the person in front of you an opportunity to vent their feelings. And if you have made mistakes, and it is okay to make mistakes, I have made mistakes in this period. It is okay to say that, maybe what we did then was a mistake. I don't feel great about it. I won't repeat it. I promise you, people will be a lot more forgiving than if you went to defense mode. I've practiced this a lot in my CEO stint over the last 3 years, and I can tell you it's been a lifesaver. So communicate bad news first, be proactive, and if someone is blaming you, don't deflect blame. I learned this during my forefront. Take your ego, put it in a glass, and throw that glass and walk all over that glass. It doesn't matter. be empathetic and just think again about what that client is going through, and then you'll be much more comfortable having a difficult conversation. Now we are in the capital markets profession, and in a crisis, what you also see, I mean, COVID is very interesting because you've got a health crisis, but you've got a market crisis as well as a health crisis. And there are, I think, a few important tips for communication that I would want to share from a capital markets point of view, because what you're doing is you're also communicating uncertain times. The first thing I would tell you is do not try to predict to your client what the outcome of markets like this is, because I'll say this in all humility, nobody has the power to predict when 2008 would bounce back, and certainly not when COVID will end. I think the best medical professionals in the world should do that job, but we as financial services professionals, I don't think these are circumstances we predict. It sounds very smart to go in front of clients and, make predictions. So, I think this will be over in 3 months, and I think this is this, 3 months later, we'll all be back to normal. The business of being predictions is a very dangerous one. I would not go and try to predict unless you're really, really sure about what you're trying to do. Don't try to predict big things. Explain information as you know it. And the second point here is sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. If you've seen Liverpool, which has been a very, very successful football team, was asked what your opinion on COVID-19 is. And he said very angrily, he said, my opinion on this doesn't matter because one, I'm not educated enough to give an opinion. And two, the opinion of famous people on a medical topic is not relevant. I don't know. And I thought that answer was very powerful. Sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know. It's better to say, I don't know. I can't predict this than to give false assurances and false answers, because ultimately you're as good as your word and your brand is your word. So trying to dilute it by predicting and saying, I don't know, in my view, is a very bad idea. The third piece of advice I would give you capital markets professionals is be very, very balanced in your communication. We are in a profession that is fundamentally very, very volatile. There will be weeks where you feel like the world is going to end, and there will be weeks where you think it will bounce back and we'll forget about COVID and life will be great again. That's okay. You can feel that internally. But in your client communication, be very, very moderate and balanced. Unless there's a reason not to be or you have a super strong view, do try to be very, very balanced in your client communication. I think people respect people with a sense of balance. And the fourth one, and I can't emphasize this enough, guys, is don't use this as an opportunity to badmouth competition. We all do good things. We all in all industries have good phases and bad phases. Saying, I did badly, but he did worse, it just doesn't reflect well. Myself, work for an NBFC parent, and I've gone through weeks and months where people badmouth my parent because the stock price falls, etc. I can tell you it doesn't feel nice, especially when it comes from competition. And the one thing I tell all my teams is use this as a chance to talk about yourself, but do not use it as an opportunity to badmouth competition, either on WhatsApp or in person. There is a group and circuit of people who love gossip and will come and say, oh, but did you see what this guy did? Did you see what that guy did? And it becomes a bad-mouthing fest. Do not use this as a chance to badmouth competition. Bad-mouthing someone else, I think, you look bad. Now I want to go to a very interesting thing, and topic. Before I want to talk about how to communicate, I've been observing over the last few weeks, what are some of the things that market professionals go out and say and communicate in a crisis? And some of these words may be familiar to you. And as I read these lines, I want you to go back and think of yourself as that client that we talked about, who is stressed about his job or his business, who's having a fight with his wife because he doesn't know what his lifestyle is going to be like, whose kids are probably sitting at home, whose portfolio is down 30-40%, and who's constantly being surrounded by bad WhatsApps about COVID. Be this person and then hear some of the messages I'm going to tell you. Valuations are cheap and it's a time to buy. Okay. Uh, my fund has fallen significantly less than competition and it's in the first quartile. This is a time to be greedy. Remember, Warren Buffett stayed invested for 30 years. In 2008, it took 1 year to bounce back, 90% return in the next year. So this is the time to buy balanced funds. By the way, last year I came and told you the time to buy large cap funds. In the previous year, I came and told you it was the time to buy mid cap funds. If I can't hear your reactions, if you're sitting in the shoes of a client, you can imagine how this communication sounds. Communication in a crisis has to sound a lot more sensitive than this. To me, this is the kind of communication, and I'm at least trying to change this in the world that lives in. That sounds, one, complicated, similar to everybody else, and it sounds a little bit salesy and insensitive. So in my view, communication should be something else. And before I tell you what I think communication should be like, I want to tell you a recent example of something I went through, which illustrates the power of communication. It's controversial, so please don't quote me too much on this. At Edelweiss AMC, we run a fairly large business in arbitrage funds. We've been old players in this market, and we've always believed that it's something that we know. About 2 weeks ago, some market rumors, everything was fine and stable. Market rumors started, and our clients started calling us that there's something wrong in the arbitrage market. Some of our counterparts had spread information that for 2-3 days there were negative returns in arbitrage funds, and that meant it was time to kind of shut the category. A few people actually went out and gave sell calls on the funds. Clients were panicked. We were getting calls, and money started flowing. So it was a very, very bad situation, and for us, it's something that we know well. We also knew that everything said in the market was actually not true. At that point, there was also a lot of rumor mongering because SEBI was going to ban short selling, etc. And people said that would hurt arbitrage funds. We thought a lot about it, and industry leaders were, and we said we don't believe all of this. We believe this is wrong. Arbitrage funds are just fine. And then there was a debate in my team, but should we communicate, because market leaders are saying something different? And the point I made at that point to my team is, if we have a strong point of view on something and we know that we're right, we should use this opportunity to communicate, because hopefully people will remember that. So we put out a note on 17th March that was quite contrary to industry. We put out a second note on 23rd of March. Everybody was shutting down their schemes for subscription. And this article that you see on the screen came out in Mint. And if you read the article, it'll talk about how a couple of AMCs have shut down those funds, and given a sell call on this space. But a note by Edelweiss AMC says just the opposite. It turns out our analysis on the category was proved a week later. And clients not only remembered our performance, but they remembered our communication. Right after this article by Mint a few days ago, a second article came out by Mint, and a lot of messages have come on social media saying, hey, why were people worried about arbitrage funds? And listen, the only guys who said the right thing were AMC. In fact, those who closed for subscription have opened for subscription again. What I'm trying to tell you is it's a difficult situation, and people remember us for the communication, and I hope people will remember us for the communication. So communication sometimes gives you an opportunity to also establish a point of view in a crowded market, to establish leadership in a crowded market. And in my view, crisis communication should have 4 or 5 elements. One is it should be quick. This is not the time to sit and debate and debate and debate. People appreciate communication that is timely and quick. If there's a move by RBI, try to get communication out by that day. If you sense a crisis spot in the market, try and put out a note by that day. Waiting for a perfect answer, not a great idea in a crisis. The second is, I think crisis communication should be simple. Think of some of those lines I told you and think of how they sound. You have to answer simple questions. of the most popular pieces of communication we did was on why liquid funds gave negative returns. These are simple questions that need basic answers in English. So crisis communication should be simple. It can be bold. I talked about an example of bold communication. It should be consistent. So if I am saying something and I'm representing an organization of 200 people, then it should be something that 200 people on my team can say. If the CEO is saying something and the ground sales in Ranchi is saying something else, that's ineffective communication, because the CEO is not the owner of communication. The whole team is the owner of communication. So before you try and communicate to clients, that communication and that message has to be very clearly present in your teams. First communicate to your team, then your team will go out and communicate to your client. If your team is not convinced, the body language will show when you talk to a client. And I think most importantly, if you see that man with a cross, crisis communication cannot sound like you're desperate to make a sale. The communication that valuations are cheap sounds a communication that comes up, please buy, I need more money. And then you see the thing, oh, you're trying to raise money. It should sound empathetic. It should sound like it's solving your problem. It should not look like I'm trying to extract money out of you. And I think, being very honest, this is one of the biggest mistakes that we make as an industry. So whatever communication, be quick, be simple, answer people's genuine problems, and don't try to look like you're making a sale. An interesting one before I end, and in the next 5 minutes, I just want to cover how to communicate when you can't go to work. These are extraordinary times. I doing that in 2008. I never could come back from the office because we were always working in that crisis. This is a crisis where you can't go to the office. So your biggest tool of sitting in front of someone and communicating is not something that you can do. What can you do otherwise? I think bad messages should be delivered with a face in front of you, not a voice. Phone conversations to deliver bad messages just don't go as well. So use Zoom, use WhatsApp call. This sounds very basic, but deliver bad messages face to face in formats like this. Seeing each other's faces just makes things a lot easier. I will reiterate, WhatsApp is not a tool of formal communication. Bad news should not be sent over WhatsApp. It's neither a written record nor is it very formal. WhatsApp is just a very bad way to send a message to someone. It just shows you don't care. Pick up the phone, do a voice call, do a video call, but communication that is meaningful and serious should not happen over WhatsApp. WhatsApp forwarding is also not a great way to communicate. I want to make a point, since Raj talked about this. When you're trying to communicate in mass, we underuse social media as a community. I personally love the power of social media. Intelligently written blogs, and by the way, we have a lot of time to write these days. Intelligently written blogs can be very powerful. Twitter and platforms like LinkedIn can be very useful to get that message out to a wider community. When we at Edelweiss publish a note, we also put that note on our website, and then we also share that note as social media. Through social media, more than WhatsApp, we are able to disseminate that message to a wider asset management community, including a lot of media who managed to pick up a note. There are many times in my own experience as CEO that we've had a crisis, and the quickest way I've tried to communicate in a crisis is just issue a clarification on social media, and people really appreciate it. So social media can be used very effectively. It takes time to build a social media presence and profile. I would invest in it, and I would use this time to invest in it. It can be used to do very positive communication, and I'm happy to answer more questions about that. Fourth thing I want to say is that, and again, over experience, we live in a generation where people watch and listen far more than they read. So if you send out a 2-page article trying to explain something, highly unlikely people will read it. If you put the same message in a 2-minute video, very likely it will be watched. So use the power of podcasts, small videos, that will help you a lot more. The fifth tip is very important. If you're ever having a difficult conversation in a crisis, please keep a written record of it, most preferably on email. A lot of things go through crises. Things sometimes get legal. it can get very ugly. Recommend you keep a record of every difficult conversation that you have. If you're having difficult conversations working in an organization, also loop in your boss or boss's boss so that you're not the only one taking difficult decisions or having difficult conversations. I want to just show you before I end one example of communication that we've been trying out. Obviously, we're not an office, so we can't shoot videos. We used to shoot very fancy videos with our fun team and myself. Now everybody is at home. Recently, some of you in the fixed income markets would know that liquid funds delivered negative returns for a day. It was a question on everybody's mind, but unfortunately, nobody was going out and answering it. So what we did is ask Dhaval Dalal, this is the picture on our left, who is our fixed income CIO, to shoot a small video on why liquid funds were negative. We did that. You can see this video is shot with him in a t-shirt, not in great quality on his phone, in the garden, and it got 10,000 views in a day. And it got so much appreciation because we answered a simple question in very bold terms very quickly. There's a similar one with our arbitrage fund manager when all that nonsense was happening. That also got thousands of views. I can tell you if Dhaval had done a note, it wouldn't have got 10,000 people to read it the way a video got 10,000 people to view it. So this kind of summarizes a lot of the things I said. Bold communication, quick communication, using the video format, and then also using social media to disseminate that. Since we are in tough times and also running out of times, I want to end with a small story on communication from 2008. The person you're seeing on screen is David Kabiller. He's the head of sales for AQR. And a lot of what I learned about communication in 2008, I learned from David. I truly believe is one of the best salespeople I've met in my life. And there was a day in August 2007 where AQR's funds lost, I think, $3 billion overnight because the quant crisis happened. David, I think at that point was vacationing in Bermuda, and there was a lot of stress then that the head of sales is not in the firm, the head of sales is not in the firm. David was such a master of client relationships, and we felt without David, we would crumble. The next day, I think we got a call from David saying, guys, don't worry, I may be in Bermuda, but I've reached out to all clients. We lost 3 billion, but we've actually raised $1 billion yesterday. And that, I think, is the power of effective communication. Proactively being there with clients, having great relationships, telling them the truth, and then also finding an opportunity. It can take you from the worst of situation, even if you're sitting in Bermuda, literally on the beach, and change the face of a firm. David's role in the firm completely changed after this crisis. And I think to a testament to communication. But the reason I wanted to end with that example is that that's the power of great communication on a business. From a crisis of communication, you can go to communication being your biggest edge. So with that, thank you. And maybe I can hand it over to Raj.
Yeah, thanks, Radhika. Really erudite as usual, and very inspiring and very insightful. I think the real life cases that you narrated are extremely useful for the people who are watching this. And as usual, this is a time when there would be a barrage of questions for you, and these are difficult times. But at the same time, as a Chinese character, of course, there's a lot of Chinese involvement in this situation now. But let me also narrate that the Chinese character for crisis is also the character of opportunity. So in that scheme of things, so is there, any situation where you feel, I mean, a crisis situation related from a fund point of view, the arbitrage fund where everybody was talking about the negative aspect of it, but you stood by your team, you supported them, and then the team got vindicated, and finally it's been a client communication case study now. In that sense, have you, I mean, in a specific case where you can actually use this opportunity of crisis to seize the opportunity and deepen the relationship with the client? I mean, is that or is this something like a damage control alone?
No, I don't think it's damage control. I think in the short term it's damage control. But if you look at, if you look at the example of arbitrage fund or the story I told of David, in the short term, you can choose in a crisis. Like in the upfront case, we could have chosen to do nothing. And in the case that we had done nothing, like everybody else in the industry, we would have lost money and then times would have bounced back. But actually, what we did was sheer opportunity. So we only used it to establish thought leadership. I think in a crisis, communication can be used to establish leadership. We often come from industries which are very cookie cutter. We all have one approach. In a crisis, if you're able to have bold decision making, if there's a category or something, if everybody is saying debt funds are horrible, whatever, but you're the guy who's convinced and you can go out and do powerful communication and you get proved right, people will remember you as the guy who gave that view at that point in time. So I think that's important. I think for people in the wealth management business, if you're the only guy proactively hand holding the client, that will be remembered. I'll give you another example. In the mutual fund industry, we've gone all digital, but because there are no physical branches today. But a lot of people are uncomfortable doing digital transactions. One of the things my team is doing is just sitting with people and teaching them how to use digital platforms. Now, this is not a stopgap measure. They don't have to do that. But the hope is that people will remember that, listen, in these times, these guys were there to teach me some new skill. And hopefully in better times, they'll remember that we don't go to them just to sell funds.
Okay, so let me then bring out some specific client facing case studies that teams face. So, for example, let me go back to the time in 2000 when there was the technology boom and then the meltdown, and it was in terms of the stock market crash and crash in NAV values. It's almost like 80-90%, particularly in the technology funds. And then they took a very long time to recover. Like in 2008, you mentioned in your presentation that, look, yeah, of course, that was part of a bad communication example that you gave in terms of recovering 90% in 1 year. But having said that, this took a long time. And when you look at that, a person who's investing in those days, really a first-time investor, getting into technology fund, getting his wealth eroded by 80%. It's a very, and at times these people are reduced to tears. So in such cases, while you being the face, you communicate and you hear. So how do you deal with these difficult situations? And there are times when people actually threaten the people, and these are very difficult times. And I'm sure that advisors at times feel very vulnerable at these junctures. So how do you? And there are two situations. One is actually saying, advisor, you be rational, you be clear, you be dispassionate, you be unemotional, and you go to a client and communicate straightforward, frank, and be frank with him. But even advisors at this point of time are vulnerable because they haven't expected the kind of meltdown, swift, the kind of crisis that they are open to now in front of the client. So how do you do that?
So I think the first thing, and I think this is a great question. I was doing an advisor call today. I think the first thing you have to remember as advisors is, if you are in the post 2008 generation of advisors, obviously this is the first time for you. And it's important to see a cycle, right? As any fund professional or any capital markets professional, this is your cycle. And you have to see the cycle because it will make it better. Now, first, as an advisor, your own body language can't shake. You can be shaky inside, but when you go out and fight that war, you've got to be damn confident, because if people see shakiness in your body language, then it's the end of the world. So as an advisor, the first thing I would ask you to do is calm down yourselves. The second thing is, you can't avoid the conversation. Please remember that you cannot avoid the conversation. You have to proactively go out and have the conversation. If someone is angry, my recommendation is, first, step one, let them vent out their anger. It really helps. Once they vented out their anger, you can start having more data-driven conversations. Okay, markets are really bad, so they fell 50% now. Look at what happened in 2008. Look at what happened in 2001. Look at what is happening in global markets. Try to tell them that what has happened to them, they're not alone. See, people feel very bad when they know that ones, but when they realize it's a much broader problem, most people start to see reason and logic. Also remember that one conversation is not going to convince someone. So do one conversation of vent, and 2-3 days later, go back and have a second data oriented conversation. That might help you a lot.
Yeah, the one thing that you mentioned is, on the social media, I mean, because these are very difficult times, clients are, can't be met physically. And at the same time, the clients need handholding, empathy, and all this, touchy-feely kind of communication that you need to do. How do you do it? I mean, of course, this is still a work in progress, and I think all of us are learning on that. But you mentioned about one of the most frequent ways to communicate is a WhatsApp, but you said that it's not a good mode. But that's WhatsApp is somewhere where all the clients are available, and it's a reasonably private, whereas Twitter and LinkedIn are more for a mass platform and too general. So how do you then look at, when clients typically, if you look at a video call, there could be emotional reasons for not really going through it. But how do you see that? I mean, is WhatsApp a complete no-no? Is there a way out? uh, yeah.
WhatsApp is, see, there's two kind of communications. There's one-to-one communication and there is mass communication, and both things need to happen. For many of us in the advisory profession or asset management profession, we actually cater to a large number of people. Now, how many people are you going to solve one-on-one? My recommendation is, see, WhatsApp is great for few one-on-one kind of issues, but if you have a systematic issue, something like ARB fund or fixed income funds or markets being down, what really helps is to put a clean one-page note or video out so that the communication is also consistent. The problem is when you're working with WhatsApp, then everybody has their own version of communication that goes out. It doesn't look formal also. When you say things on WhatsApp, you don't know what's been edited, what's formal, what's informal. Is this real? Is this not real? You don't know. It doesn't have seriousness. So if you have a point of view on something, then you should express it in a formal form, and then you use WhatsApp as a means to send that note. If you made a one-page note or a video, na, use WhatsApp as a means to send that note. Use Twitter as a means to send that note. But WhatsApp in itself cannot be a form of communication because unfortunately WhatsApp is not formal. I have a very different and maybe contra view on this from the rest of the world, but I don't believe WhatsApp represents formal communication. It's good for one-on-one chats and clarifying problems and all of that, but you can't be solving crises over WhatsApp.
See, other thing, typically in our industry, the constraint is that with hardly any short selling allowed, even if your view is right, you will still have to face up to the situation the client's portfolio will deplete. How do you overcome that? I mean, is there a way out? I mean, in a sense that to protect clients' portfolios without really being able to use all the tools that are available in the market.
So I think clients get a very angry at equity funds, and every time there is a big market correction, clients blast equity mutual fund managers that boss, why are you down, etc., etc. Clients have to be explained the mandate of funds. The mandate of long only equity funds, as they will 99% be fully invested. This is a logical conversation that needs to happen. Unfortunately, the time to have this conversation is actually not a bear market. These are conversations that should happen in a bull market. In a bull market, a lot of the communication is mid gaps are going to be the star for the next generation, not that they could be down 50%. But this concept that a fund has a mandate, a fund has a boundary, and a fund will operate in that boundary is a necessary communication in asset management or in wealth management. If you are buying a credit risk fund and your client is upset that credit defaults are happening, then something has gone wrong in communication. So the fact that funds have a mandate, that needs to be communicated. There are hedge funds, there are asset allocation funds that can take cash calls. Customers should be invested. But this concept that every fund has a life and mandate and the fund manager will operate within that mandate, that is very necessary to explain. And by the way, clients, I think, are beginning to understand this. My view in this crisis, what I have seen is that there is more anger around fixed income than there is around equity, because a lot of clients have gone through 2008 and understand equity corrections. Fixed income is a first time for them, and there I think as an industry, communication has probably been a little weaker.
The flip side, I think that's a great answer. But other thing is, in terms of communication, is there, one is the flip side of communication is also over communication. Is there a time or a period where you feel that, in order to get out of the noise, it's better for a client to not be communicated? I mean, do you feel there is a time for that as well?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a great question. I mean, messaging a client his portfolio value every day is just not going to help him. In fact, clients should be seeing portfolios once a quarter, but in the news-based world that we live in, that just doesn't happen. I think you should communicate when you have new information to it. In a crisis, there's a certain amount of regular communication that you do. You know, a crisis says, hey, portfolios are down, you have one communication with the client. Now, after that, do you need to be talking to him every day or every week? No. If you have something material to say, then go communicate with him. Telling him that the Nifty is down 5% today, then 10%, then 20% today is not going to achieve anything. So communicate once as hygiene, once a month, maybe, and then when there is material update. And communication is not telling customers the news. We feel that clients don't have access to news. They have access to all news. Communication is something that should prompt someone to take action or tell someone, okay, this has happened in the market, but you are okay. Just don't worry about it, etc., etc. So communication is something that you should communicate when you have something to say of value that the news is already not communicated.
And how do you set expectations? Because at times like these, clients become very demanding, and in a sense that, and typically in sales at this point in time, people tend to be very defensive and can't really be firm in terms of setting the right expectations. So how do you reconcile with the two?
See, there is a balance because you as a sales guy have only so much bandwidth, right? You can't be everywhere. And I think the one thing this crisis has taught us is that you don't need to be everywhere. There is a certain amount of time you will spend calling a client, doing video calls, but there has to be a lot of, and that's why I emphasize the need for written communication and more than that, video-based communication. So some of the communication has to be packaged and wholesale, and you can supplement it as a sales guy. And this is something your organization has to work with you on. If you're catering to 20, 30 clients, can you do a few standardized notes that you can send to all clients and then follow up with a conversation? Maybe that's something that you can do. You can't have 30 conversations every day with 30 different people. It's not going to work. There has to be some scalable communication plus some customized communication.
See, the way we learn, and come to the job market and take up various roles in the industry, we are kind of focused too much on the technical skills, the hard skills part, and very little emphasis is given to soft skills. And many of us are brutally exposed in an environment like this. I mean, you as an organization and Realwise, how do you resolve this issue? And I'm sure this will be very common across the industry.
Yeah, I think soft skills is something that one of us, you learn only with a crisis. I don't think soft skills training teaches you soft skills in itself. But I think we learn from our leaders. That's truly the answer. I do think, by the way, a lot of us have time in this crisis, and it's a great time to brush up on your communication skills. It's a great time to brush up on your writing skills. It's a great time to brush up on your reading skills. One of the things that we started with our team, and I encourage other people to do it, is on an unrelated communication note, we said, let's start an employee blog, and we're encouraging employees to write pieces of 800-word communication that could be useful to investors in general. Now, a lot of people are struggling with, how do I get started? And I said, you have to each go out and write one blog, and then you're going to speak about that blog, because you'll only learn communication by doing. These are the ways to develop soft skills. So the one message I would give to everybody is also use this as an opportunity to start developing some soft skills. There are great resources out there to help you do that as well.
Yeah, thanks. There's one question that I think addressed to you on your personal role as a CEO.
Okay.
You are, like a social media maven, if I am able to put it correctly. And, there are a lot of investors who kind of reach out to you directly over Twitter or LinkedIn or various social media platforms that you are active in. So in such a case, how do you resolve the conflict where, they are supposed to go as per protocol, through the channels or whatever, but then they are reaching out to you for specific problems? I mean, is there some way you tend to reconcile that conflict?
If anyone's reaching and I know they're a channel partner client, then of course when I respond, I keep the RM and the channel partner in loop. Most of the people who reach out to me, I suspect, are direct investors. There's always a very fine line in responding on social media. So I categorize people into buckets. If people have operational queries or settlement issues or a transaction is not processed, I try to send that to my team as quickly as possible. And that's the range of questions that I usually have. The second is people want information about products. If it's a channel partner thing, then I usually the channel partner. And I think we are answering harmless product information. So I do that. If it's giving a very controversial view on something, or if someone is trying to troll me, my stance is to ignore. I don't take on those kind of things. Social media is not a platform to say things that are very, very controversial in nature, because you live in a time where it can be picked up by media also. And, it just goes out of proportion. So I use social media to answer investor queries that are either operational in nature or they want to understand perspective. Most of my social media handle is to share stories, wisdom, try and inspire people. And I think that doesn't aggravate most people. I also used social media because I have reached to share a lot of the notes our team puts out. And that I think is something all of us can do.
So you also mentioned in your presentation about your erstwhile colleague David, who headed sales in AQR Capital, and the way he was able to, you know, build confidence at the time AQR was going through a crisis. So one of the questions was, can you elaborate on what exactly he did in terms of communication, even though he was away in Bermuda? And in those days, of course, the communication tools aren't as developed as we have today.
So I think one, David had always had a great equation with people, and great communication will not emerge in a crisis until you build great relationships before the crisis. So I think that worked for David. I think what worked for him is that the day this happened, literally the day this happened, he went to a lot of people and told them what had happened, why it had happened, and he got them on calls with everybody in the team. And then he was very gracious in listening to client problems and then talking to them about why this is an opportunity going forward. So I think for David is very timely communication, very honest communication. He didn't try to hide from the fact that the fund is down 30% or that this is why the fund is down. He was very honest in his ability to communicate, and he was very proactive. And I think the proactivity is what won him that. Being the first one in this race, I can't emphasize how many brownie points that often wins you. And I think that's something that I learned from David. Be the first guy, because once the first guy does it, by the way, 10 people will rush to communicate. But being the first guy in this case is a great idea.
Thanks, Radhika. There's one question in terms of how would you, it's a behavioral thing. How would you separate, typically what happens in a crisis like that, we go back to the previous crisis, and most of us are now comparing this with the global financial crisis of 2008. And some of the stimulus that's been pumped in is very similar to that. As somebody jokingly said that, if there's going to be a Martian invading India or Earth, then people would start reducing risk. So in such a case, how do you separate your hindsight biases in kind of communicating to clients? Because this could be completely different from what we had experienced in the past.
The one thing I try to do is I try not to, so every crisis is different. And I think I completely agree with you that to compare this to GFC or to Great Depression, I mean, there are analogs. There are people who compare this to World War II. I think you can talk to clients about crises. Some of the principles of crisis are relevant and timeless. The fact that if you invest at cheaper valuations, you have a higher probability of making money. Now, this is standard across crises, that equities fall and they do bounce back. How long they bounce back is different. So I think there are some standard basic good investment management principles that hold through in crises. But to say GFC came back in 9 months and this is like GFC and this will do that, I don't do. And that's what I said in the presentation. Resist the urge to make predictions based on previous crises. Principles, yes, you can have principle level discussions on crises, but prediction is very hard for us to do.
There are two last questions that are there. So one question that's there is, you mentioned as a wartime CEO, it's okay to make mistakes, own up to the mistakes with the client. But there's this defensiveness amongst many of us in terms of, if we own up, how will the client react? Is there going to be a legal case against me? Will our employers they punish us? So how do you put this? I mean, how do you put it across? How do you solve this dilemma in the minds of the advisor or the
So
manager taking?
first remember that, and it's a very good question. First remember that if you have made a mistake and you think the clients are not going to find out, then that is not going to happen. In today's connected world, someone will find out. It is very important, however, to keep your organization in the loop when you're doing difficult client communications. Don't be the lone wolf here. Hopefully, when you have taken a decision to recommend a product to the client, you've done something within your organization's boundaries. So if you work for a wealth management firm, you have sold a product that was a recommended product from your wealth management house. I'm just giving an example. If you are an asset management salesman, you sold something that the AMC approved. So the organization is backing. Secondly, if it is a very difficult client who you know is likely to get legal, etc., before talking to the client, have a conversation with your boss, your compliance officer, etc. Do not try to solve the problem alone, because 80% of these problems do become regulatory, and young people often try to solve them themselves. I always tell my team, I have a little more experience than you on this. I can help you. So don't fight the battle alone. You should be able to judge who is a difficult client, who is a litigational client, etc. Please loop in your organization. Please keep a record of all communication that you've had. And there's a way to say, I've made a mistake. So you could have said, maybe this was not the best product for you. That doesn't mean you've missold a product. That's very, very different. Maybe your asset allocation to equities was higher than it should have been. Those are the kind of conversations to have. Or you've communicated late. And someone says, sorry, I should have come back a week earlier and this. I think people are more forgiving than you think they are, but the client is a demanding litigious one. Please loop your organization in.
Final question, to all the young people out there who's looking out in terms of careers in investment advisory or management. What's your advice there? And also to the young people, what should be their approach to investments? So what's your advice in there?
My advice to people in the capital markets business: if you are looking for a career in this industry, it's a great industry. It's a glamorous industry, it rewards well, but it is also a tough and demanding industry. And that is the reality. We say in investment management, no return without risk. That is what this career is. So please know that before jumping in. There are years of glorious highs, there are years of glorious and miserable lows. So please remember that it comes with the territory. And just as you invest and you look at risk and returns with career, be sure that you're mentally ready to get into this. I see more people going to I see a lot of people going through mental health problems in this industry. I've seen it in eight, I've seen layoffs, and you really see everything that you do. So this is an industry that requires this. And on the personal investment side, I wrote a Twitter blog on this, and I wrote this on LinkedIn as well. I believe that in a capital markets professional, and investing is very personal, because the profession is very volatile. At least my approach has been, and I'm married to a capital markets professional also, to keep my investments a little conservative, because in a bad year, your bonuses suck, your business does bad, there's a threat of jobs, your ESOPs are underwater, it all collapses. So if you know anything about diversification, just make sure your personal investments are not a source of stress, because you have so much professional stress. It's slightly controversial advice, but at least that's what I used to follow.
Thanks, Radhika. That's a great, insightful address by you, and the very impressive way in which you answered all the questions. Very frank, and I think there's a great learning for all of us here, and really a master class in communication. And appreciate your time as well as the audience time. I really appreciate, because these are very difficult times. These are times when I think, as we are speaking, we are still learning. We are coming to grips with what's happening. This is a time when I think we are completely lost in a way, bereft in a way, because we don't have the physical infrastructure. We are operating out of remote locations. But having said that, really appreciate your time, Radhika, and great address once again. And thanks for making it. Thank you
Good
all.
luck and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you all.